Alencia Lumian Omen Hyelvo. Today I bring to you the Wars of Beleriand. Before we start, though, a quick background. I will only be covering the major battles of these wars, meaning the First Battle of Beleriand, Dagor Nuin Gileath, Dagor Aglarib, Dagor Bragollach, Nirnaeth Arnoediad, and the War of Wrath. If you want me to cover the more minor battles of Beleriand, please let me know in the comments below. We will start by listing all the commanders of both sides, so strap yourselves in, it'll be a very long list. On the side of the Free Peoples, we have Thingol, Melion, Círdan, Denethor, Fëanor, Maethros, Maglor, Celegorm, Coranthir, Curufin, Amrod, Amros, Fingolfin, Fingon, Torgon, Finrod, Angrod, Aignor, Orudreth, Gwyndor, Bragollach, Barahir, Hador, Galdor, Hurin, Huor, Haldir, Bor, Azagal, Ionwi, Ingwi, Finarfin, and Earendil. For the side of Morgoth, we have Morgoth, Sauron, Gothmog, as well as the 6 other Balrogs, Glaurung, Uldor, and Encalagon the Black. This war was the longest war in Middle-earth's history, lasting from 1497 of the Years of the Trees all the way to the end of the First Age in 587. The war began when Morgoth, after slaying the 2 trees of Valinor and stealing the Silmarils, had returned to Angband to conquer Middle-earth. Morgoth sent hordes of orcs to attack the Sindar elves that still dwelt in Beleriand. Thingol, king of the Sindar, gathered what strength he could, and in unison with Denethor of the Lyaquendi, caught the host of orcs between the hammer and the anvil of their forces. The Lyaquendi, however, were lightly armed compared to the orcs, and Denethor's elves would be pushed back to Amon Ereb, and there Denethor and many Lyaquendi fell. Thingol and the Sindar would cut through the orcs, scattering the remaining orcs to be killed by the dwarves of Nogrod. Unfortunately, the western host of elves under Círdan were not faring well and were locked in a siege in the Falas, and Thingol would be unable to send aid after the creation of the Girdle of Melion. It would be some time later, when the Noldor from Valinor arrived under Fëanor, that the Dagor Nuin Gileath would begin. Morgoth learned that Fëanor and his sons now camped near Mithrim, and hoped to destroy them before the Noldor established themselves, so he sent his orc armies to destroy them. The Fëanorians would be ambushed, but due to the high elven nature of the Noldor, they quickly overcame the rushing armies. While the main orcs were being slaughtered by the Fëanorians, more orcs, the orcs laying siege to Falas, were swiftly coming north, but Celegorm, the 3rd son of Fëanor, would learn about these orcs, and he gathered several companies of elves and set a trap for these orcs. Celegorm and his elves would lay waste to the orcs, while Fëanor would pursue the surviving orcs to the Thangorudrim. There, Fëanor would move far ahead, and the orcs, being joined by the Balrogs, slew Fëanor's guard and gravely wounded him. In that moment, the 7 sons of Fëanor came and drove back the Balrogs. Fëanor would soon perish, and the rest of the Noldor united under Fingolfin, and many realms were made to combat Morgoth. For many years Morgoth and the Noldor would build their fortresses, until the Dagor Aglarib, when Morgoth sent his forces into Dorthonion to destroy the Noldor, whom Morgoth had believed weak. The Noldor, though, quickly struck back under Fingolfin and Maethros, attacking the orcs from all sides, joining forces with Angrod and Aignor in Dorthonion. The combined elven host was strong enough to utterly crush the orcs, sending few back to Morgoth. With the glorious battle came the siege of Angband, and Morgoth would be forced to bide his time, creating new creatures and other ill devices. In 455, Morgoth was done waiting, and from the Thingorudrim, lava and fires erupted quickly and without warning, slaughtering the elves and men that lay watched in Ard Gallin. With this, the Dagor Bragollach began, and an unimaginable host came forth from Angband, of not just orcs, but Balrogs and the dragon Glaurung. The suddenness of the battle left the elves reeling, as in Dorthonion, Angrod and Aignor were slain, as was Bragollach of the house of Beor, and the realms of Dorthonion and Ladros were ruined. Finrod, who heard of his brother's plight, went with his army to save those he could, but he had arrived too late, and the hosts of Angband drove into the elves of Nargothrond. Finrod would have been slain, had Barahir not come with the rest of the men from Ladros, creating a barrier for Finrod and his elves. In the east, the sons of Fëanor too were worsened, as Maglor was defeated and retreated to Himring, where Maethros dwelt, for the dragon Glaurung led the hosts in the east. Thargelion too was utterly destroyed, with Caranthir venturing south with his brothers Amrod and Amros. Celegorm and Curufin, along with many of their followers, would be pushed out of Himlad, and they fled to Nargothrond. In the west, the rivers of flame were stopped by the arid Wethrin. The fortresses of Hithlum were thus besieged by orcs and Balrogs and other fell creatures. Defending the rearguard of the elves, the men of Dor-Lomin, led by Hador, fought valiantly, and when Hador fell, his son Galdor led his people in battle. It would be by the strength of these men and the Noldor that prevented the conquering of Hithlum. For Morgoth was impatient, it did not count the valor of his enemies, and so he rushed his attacks, and in the end that cost Morgoth total victory. The remaining free peoples would over the course of many years regroup and rebuild their forces with new alliances with the Easterling tribes and the dwarves of Belegost. In 472 the Union of Maethros was assembled, and Fingon and Maethros led the western and eastern hosts. Morgoth, though, had corrupted one tribe of Easterlings under Uldor, and he learned all his enemies had planned. Morgoth devised a plan to bring forth the Noldor into battle prematurely. He sent his agents to delay Maethros in the east, and he sent a small host of orcs to the western host. When the elves saw those orcs, they wished to leap upon their foes. But Hurin, lord of Dor-Lomin, wisely counseled the elves restrain, for Morgoth was cunning and always held some greater power in reserve. The orcs were ordered to bring the Noldor out from their fortresses, and so they brought prisoners out, and cruelly slew them before, saying that they had many more prisoners whom they shall slay upon their return. The wrath of the Noldor could not be restrained, for one of the prisoners was Gelmir, whose brother Gwyndor led the elves from Nargothrond, and Gwyndor rode forth with his company and slew many orcs. Thus Fingon sent his armies forth to battle, and the forces clashed together at Anfauglith. Gwyndor in his wrath rode all the way to the gates of Angband, and there he was trapped, and his company was slain, with Gwyndor himself being captured. Morgoth now let forth his main host, as his token force was all but destroyed. This is truly when the Nirnaeth Arnoediad began, for Finrod and his hosts were beaten back ever closer to Hithlum. Haldir and many men of Brethil were felled in the rear guard, and in the early morning the free peoples were surrounded. But Torgon, brother of Fingon, and the elves of Gondolin came cleaving through the orcs to find a path to Fingon. And at that time too Mithros and the host of the east arrived, but here Morgoth's designs were full wrought, as the Easterlings under Uldor turned either to flee or to battle the Noldor. The battle now turned to chaos, as the sons of Fëanor were now trapped between evil Easterlings and the orcs under the dragon Glaurung. Not all of the Easterlings served Morgoth, as the sons of Bor proved loyal and slew Ulfast and Ulworth, with Uldor being killed by Maglor. But the damage was done, as the sons of Fëanor fled with what few elves were left to them. The dwarves alone of the eastern force stayed to fight, as they could withstand dragon fire better than any other, and they hacked and slashed at Glaurung. The dragon crushed the dwarf king Azekal, but with his dying axe he stabbed the belly of Glaurung, wounding him, making him flee, and many creatures with him. The dwarves then departed the battle, mourning their king. This left only the western host to fend for themselves, for they now faced an enemy 3 times their size. Now the hosts of Morgoth were led by the Balrogs, and they cut through the free people's army, and Fingon came face to face with Gothmog, the lord of Balrogs. Their duel was fierce, but another Balrog came behind and hewed Fingon with Gothmog, beating Fingon into dust. This left only Torgon and the Gondolindrim, and Hurin, Huor, and the surviving men of Dor-Lomin. Hurin and Huor told Torgon to return to Gondolin and keep its location a secret, while Hurin and Huor held the rearguard. The last stand of Dor-Lomin was great, yet all but Hurin would be slain. Hurin then cast aside his shield and fought with an axe 2-handed, slaying well nigh 70 foes, crying aloud, "Aure and Taluva!" His axe would wither, and Gothmog came and captured it. Himring, Hithlum, and Dor-Lomin now fell to Morgoth, and over many more years Nargothrond and Gondolin fell, but I'll cover those battles in a different video. When it seemed that Morgoth had won the wars, Eärendil the Mariner, the grandson of both Huor and Torgon, set sail to Valinor, asking for aid from the Valar. The Valar then sent Eonwy with all the Vanyar elves and the Noldor of Valinor, led by Ingwi and Finarfin. Whether the Valar themselves joined is up for contention, but the host of the west then joined with the remaining elves, men, and dwarves of Beleriand, and they marched forth in one final battle against Morgoth, the War of Wrath. This battle was great and terrible, with all of Beleriand being engulfed. Morgoth's forces had become innumerable, but the free people were valiant and stronger, pushing Morgoth's armies back slowly. But at last, in 587, Morgoth was at the throes of defeat, and he loosened one last device, the winged dragons led by Ancalagon the Black, greatest of the winged dragons. Here the host of the west was halted, and would have been pushed far away from Thangordrim, possibly defeated, had Eärendil on Vingalot not come with many great eagles. Earendil would battle in Calagon for a day before the great dragon was slain, breaking the thing Gorudrim and completely defeating Morgoth. Morgoth would try to sue for pardon, but Eonwy hewed his feet and took him back to Valinor, and the Valar would cast Morgoth into the walls of night beyond the void. And thus the Wars of Beleriand were won, though Beleriand itself was sunken below the sea in ruin, and the First Age would now come to an end. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at the Wars of Beleriand. As always, feel free to like and subscribe for more content, and please let me know what I can better do to improve these videos. Thanks, and as the elves say, Namarie.